Hello and welcome to Learning Rewired, the podcast where we explore the ideas and insights reshaping leadership, learning, and the future of work. I'm your host, Tiago Kivi. Today, we're diving into the future. And I'd love to say that the future is a very far and distant place. But the reality is, we're talking about the future that is happening right now. The issues and the problems, the challenges that leaders need to think about right now. And to cover that, I have a very special guest here with me, Peter Fisk. Hello, Peter.
Hi, great to be here.
Thank you for coming. Peter, you are a global thought leader in business strategy, innovation. You've had books. You work with leading organizations. You create a lot of insight on major trends, market trends, mega trends. But tell me, who is Peter Fisk?
Who's Peter Fisk? Okay, so Peter Fisk is a guy who started out his life underneath the Alps in a superconductivity lab studying physics. Got bored with that, jumped into the world of supersonic travel, and then discovered the world of marketing and branding, and then worked with some of the world's leading companies like Microsoft and American Express. Really moved into the world of strategy and innovation. And for the last 20 years, I've been kind of combining a role of writing books, normally during the summer, kind of when the sun is shining, with keynote speaking, teaching and consulting. And really, how do they combine together is that I'm curious about what makes companies thrive today, all around the world. I love traveling. I've worked with over 300 companies in 55 countries, and I try to bring together what are the best new ideas, what are the best new practices, which all types of companies are really making work and succeeding through, and then saying, how can you apply those to your company, wherever you are today?
At what point do you get that call from, let's say, the CEO or from the HR director, from the finance director, from the marketing director? I don't know. At what point do you get that call? What usually is the problem that they're trying to solve, that and they need your help with?
It's usually they don't know what the problem is. So actually, I learned quite a long time ago that part of the kind of the ways you can help companies is actually to help them to work out what is the problem, which we're trying to solve. What they know is that they're finding competition tougher, they're finding kind of growth harder, and that they kind of perhaps aren't finding the free flowing of their organizations, which they were over the previous years. So it's getting tougher, and they want to think, what do we do? Do we work harder? And normally kind of that's what they try to do, and they cut their costs and they try to be more efficient. But that's probably not the answer. And certainly in today's world, I think transformation is the big thing which every organization needs to constantly think about, and constantly think about, even when they're doing well. How can we reinvent ourselves for the future? And then how can we reinvent ourselves again for the future? And so there's constant kind of looking for how do you drive innovation, but also how do you drive transformation becomes the big challenge, but also the real thing which business leaders should be looking for.
You just released the A to Z trends, the kaleidoscope, right, for 2025, which basically includes collection of ideas, collection of trends. I look at that document you shared, and I think there's a lot going on. There's a lot, right? It's no doubt, right?
Absolutely.
You go LinkedIn, you go anywhere, you scroll through the news. There's so much, and it's very difficult to understand what makes sense. What are the key things really that we should be paying attention? If you were to summarize 2025 into one word or sentence, what would that be?
Acceleration.
Why?
So I think we've kind of we've come through a period of time ever since the Industrial Revolution where we've seen faster and faster reinvention of companies, but also industries and society. And technology has provided a super fuel to really accelerate many of those changes, not just in the technologies and how you can apply them, but in society and culture itself. And I think that acceleration will now kind of increase, and there's no doubt that those two big letters AI is one of the most important factors. But it's not just AI itself, it's what you do with AI, which really matters. So it's about how companies are now really recognizing, I have to embrace that because my competitors are, my customers expect it, they expect personalization, they expect instancy of response. So I need to really embrace AI in thinking about new business models, in thinking about how can I reinvent my customer experiences, in thinking about how do I reinvent my organization itself and how people work. And therefore, that is the expectation both inside the organization, but also of investors too. And so this acceleration, I think, in terms of the adoption of technology is really the big thing of 2025.
And why do you think leaders struggle so much with this?
Because we don't understand it.
Is it simply that?
I think there's this. We don't have to understand everything about it, and that's one of the first points. We live in this world of incredible, rapid change and complexity, and we come from a place where we try to understand everything. And we only feel comfortable when we understand everything, and we've read all the articles and we're on top of everything. But you can't really do that today. And we need to have more fluid minds where we're capable of kind of riding the waves of change and not necessarily understanding everything, but bringing together groups of people who, both inside the organization in terms of our teams, but also outside the organization in our ecosystems, groups of people who can make sense of it together. And really our challenge is to connect those different ideas and to think what is relevant, what is most practical and profitable for our organizations today, and how can I also kind of future-proof my organization so that I'm making the right decisions so that I'm ready for tomorrow.
Is there also a human element in this as well? Are we humans inherently resistant to the change as well? From your perspective, and or do you think it's simply a question of we're not really understanding the technology, we don't know what to do with it, we know it's happening, but we don't know what to do? Or is it also there's an additional element as well?
I think you're absolutely right. There's that great Kubler-Ross curve, if you remember that, which says that every human being is resistant to any form of change initially, because we don't understand it, because we feel comfortable with what we do. But then gradually we see the opportunities and we start to kind of embrace those opportunities and experiment with them. And then we see that the possibilities are there. I think behind your question really is this world of technology and specifically AI. Is it replacing humans? Is it replacing jobs? Is it is it taking over from what we do? And the answer is yes and no, of course. And there was a recent report by the World Economic Forum which said that I think it was 87 million jobs are likely to disappear by 2030 due to AI, but 97 million jobs will be created by 2030 due to AI. So it's not so much about really kind of, there being less jobs. It's about doing different things. And most of it will be enhancing or augmenting what we can do as humans. And that's the real opportunity. It's liberating us from the tedium. It's liberating us from the Excel spreadsheets. It's liberating us from the 6-month budget cycles and thinking, how can we add more human value? How can we add more creativity? How can we be more collaborative? How can we be more human in terms of the care and the personalization which we give people? And that's the added value to customers, it's the added value economically to the business, and it's the added value to the employee too, in terms of what they can do. So, I think it's a time of great anxiety in some ways, but also awakening in terms of, well, what could we do? Rather than being slaves to the system or slaves to the machine of business, how can we create more human businesses?
Yeah. But do you think as well that, I guess the promise of AI It's that we will be freed from the boring work and end up doing more human work, more intelligent, more strategic work. I'm not sure how much you use AI yourself on your daily basis. I've been, of course, like most people, working with Copilot, ChatGPT, all these tools, right? And yeah, you do get to, you speed up things massively, and you're able to perhaps do something that you would do in a day, and you do that in a couple of hours or even less. But the question is, those additional hours that you gain or technically gain, they end up getting filled with more work. And then I guess the reality, so far at least, and for most people I talk to, the reality is you feel busier. um so of course, yeah, there's an impact as well, perhaps on mental health. I don't know. So do you have any perspectives on this as well, and how to find that balance? Or have you come across anybody who's doing this really well?
Well, I mean, I think I've worked a lot with Microsoft, for example. They're one of my biggest clients over the last 5 years, and they have truly kind of prioritized both human working and creativity and collaboration, and also well-being as part of their kind of their core values within their business. And I think we forget that AI has been around for a long time. It's been in our sat navs in our cars for the last 10 years, and it's enhanced the ways in which we kind of sort our emails, on the way in which we do Google searches for the last decade too. But AI today, is really accelerating those core things which we have done and we've spent a lot of time doing. And I would take something like, profiling customer databases, being able to drive an email marketing campaign, doing your budgets, for example. Many organizations are so tired of spending month after month working through the numbers of their annual budgets and never have time to do anything. So, suddenly it starts to liberate you from those things. And how do you fill the time? Well, that's your choice.
Yeah.
So
More work, less work.
So, hopefully the work is more interesting. Hopefully the work is more creative. I don't necessarily mean you can go home early, but the point is that hopefully you do the stuff which you want to do. Hopefully you can do something which is more fulfilling. Hopefully you do something which is actually more valuable to the organization. So your value created, your output becomes much richer. So that's the hope.
Yeah.
And I think, we all have a responsibility to think about, well, how do we use our time, as well as in terms of, thinking about, well, how can I do my job better?
And just moving on from technology, AI, from that long list of trends, what else do you think it's worth highlighting, and things that leaders should really be paying attention to?
I think, well, if you look across the world, if you look across the most interesting companies right now, so if you look, let's think about some of those companies. If you look in terms of automotive, would be a stark example. You can see the Teslas of the world compared to the Volkswagens of the world. Volkswagen is the world's biggest car company, 4 times bigger in sales revenue than Tesla. Tesla is somewhere between 10 and 20 times more valuable. If you look at food and drink, nothing to do with technology, PepsiCo is twice as big as Coca-Cola, but Coca-Cola is twice as valuable as PepsiCo. But there's a Chinese company called Kwaichao Moutai, which is even more valuable than Coca-Cola. So the rules of business are changing quite a lot. And the idea that you should sell more and be the biggest company in your sector, have the highest market share, is not necessarily the measure of success.
Yeah.
And being able to think about, are you serving the right audiences? Do you have the right profit model to extract margin from those markets which you choose to be in? Are you doing the right things which will drive the future cash flows of your business, which is what the investors are interested in? They are the things which matter much more. So I think that kind of mindset shift becomes really important. And this whole idea of, I know it's a term which people have perhaps overused, but are you future-proofing your business?
Yeah, absolutely.
What does that really mean? And most organizations are not. Most organizations are still running 20th century formulae.
Yeah.
For the ways in which they work. They work in a linear way, they work incrementally, they try to reduce the cost and be efficient at what they've done. They look backwards and say, well, how can we do what we've done better? They look at our capabilities, which made us successful in history, and they say, how can we use those capabilities as opposed to seize the opportunities of the future and then find partners to bring the new capabilities? So I think that's part of the problem. Then we have the challenge in terms of organizations still being, rigidly structured with silos and quite slow, and so instead they need to be faster and flexible and much more focused in terms of what they want to do, and harnessing the power of these new technologies and data which goes with it. And then the issues become more important. So it's not just about serving your customers, it's about how do you actually serve the world at the same time. So how do you make a difference to the environment and society? If you have a purpose as a company, why do you exist? You exist for a bigger purpose than just being a money machine.
Yeah.
So how do you actually make a contribution to the world? And certainly people, customers, and talent look to, are those organizations really contributing to a better world before I choose who I want to buy from or to work with?
And it's very interesting because you mentioned a couple of organizations here that are more valuable, I guess, valuable than organizations that are bigger than they are, right? And you also launched the most inspiring companies list.
I did, yes.
2025.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting as well because they're all very different. They all come from different industries. There was a yerba mate maker, and there was also BYD, which is the Chinese electric car maker.
Yep.
But what do these companies have in common, in your perspective? Why are they in that list?
They're in the list because they're inspiring. So they're not necessarily the biggest. They're not necessarily the ones who are dominating their markets at the moment, but probably will in the future. And I think there's something to learn from each one. And in a sense, that's what I spend most of my time doing is really to look around the world. Who are the most interesting companies who you could learn from? Because there was that great phrase from 40 years ago, which said that the future is already here, but it's unevenly distributed.
True.
You've heard that phrase. So the future is already here, but it's unevenly distributed, and it's already in lots of different companies. And in a sense, if we're a company sitting in Germany or Spain or Saudi Arabia or whatever, and want to say, well, how do we do things better or different? We've got all of these kind of ideas around us in terms of adjacent countries and adjacent sectors.
Yeah.
So how can you take the best ideas from Ping An, which is the world's largest insurance company today, based in Shenzhen in China? Ping An is an insurance company, but it's also become the world's largest healthcare platform by thinking differently in terms of how can it grow its business into the future and developing a double portfolio for growth. Or you look at Argentina, where Mercado Libre and Marcus Galperin has developed the largest e-commerce business in Latin America. But it's actually even bigger as a fintech business, as a financial services business. Or you look in India, where Jio, which started off as a petrochemical company, Reliance, and then it spun out a telecoms business called Jio, and then Jio became a super app, and the super app now becomes like the leading lifestyle brand in India in 5 years. And you think, how do these companies do it? But then you start to look at their stories, and they both inspire you. They give you new ways to think about the future. They give you vision, but they also give you courage. And I think, to answer the question, if you look across the world and these interesting companies, which I particularly talk about, it's having a vision which is bigger and different, and it's having courage to step out of the norm and to step up as a leader to say, how can I do something different? How can I move my organization forwards? How can I create the future of my organization starting now?
And how do you answer that question?
Which one?
The one, how do you start building the future of my organization right now?
The best way to create the future now is to jump to the future. And, one of the things I spend an awful lot of time doing is helping companies do business planning. And when they do business planning or they develop their new strategy, they always look at last year and they always say, how can I do better? And they kind of take last year's results and they add 10%. And then I say, well, what did you do last year? Well, they took the previous year and they added 10% to the previous year. And they took the previous year, they took 10% and added to the previous year. So they never really change.
Yeah.
They evolve. They stretch the old model. But they don't kind of create a discontinuity. So the best way is to jump to the future. And depending on your industry, that might be jumping 5 years ahead or jumping 10 years ahead. So say, what is it you really want your organization and your marketplace to look like in 5 years or 10 years' time? And get clarity of that. And then say, well, if that's what I want it to look like in 5 years' time, what do I want it to look in 3 years' time? Therefore, if I want to get to that place in 3 years' time, what do I need to do next year? So next year isn't fixing the old problems and trying to make the old model work. Instead, it's the start of 5 years. And so you're starting creating the future. So working future back.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? How do you work future back? Well, you use lots and lots of clues, which you already have. So the mega trends are one of the big things. So really looking at the big pathways of change. And we spend a lot of time relevant to each industry, looking at what are the big pathways of change, both the geopolitical pathways, but the technological, social, the cultural, the organizational. Then looking at what are the different scenarios which could emerge and how those scenarios are different. So rather than just looking at one strategy to the future, looking at optional strategies to the future, and what are the consequences of those things, both in terms of the positives, but also the challenges. And then say, which one would I prefer? Which future would I like to create? And then the challenge is to say, well, okay, I've got a clarity of which future I'd like to create. I've got a view, a roadmap working backwards, 5, 3, 1, in terms of what it could look like. Now I need to start doing it. And that means you need to jump with a bit of courage out of doing today's business and the safety net, if you like, of always doing the same thing.
And to take that jump, apart from courage, is that something that is essential as well, that you need internally? Is it tech? Is it the right skills? Is it the right people? What is it?
I think yes, it's all of those things. Most of all, it's the willingness to try things, to experiment.
A mindset.
A mindset of forwards looking,
Right.
a mindset of change is normal, but also a mindset of experimentation. Because lots of people think about creating the future is risky. Letting go of the past is even more risky. But experimentation is the best way to lower that risk. Because if you can try small experiments and try them really quickly, you see what works and doesn't work. So if you can try something and you can launch it to your customers or even just a small group of your customers, say within 1 month, you can see how your customers react to it. And then they can get involved and they can make it better and they can make it better. And so therefore you're reducing the risk of having to kind of sit inside your ivory tower for 3 or 4 years and kind of dream about the future and then find something which doesn't work for the customer at the end of it. So building a culture of experimentation, building a culture of having lots of projects, and they might be external ventures or they might be internal projects, and building a mindset, or as we call it, the growth mindset, in terms of being able to kind of constantly think about not optimizing your current business, but experiments and exploring your possible business. And, I said before that I worked with Microsoft. One of the kind of the biggest things I saw with Microsoft was when Satya Nadella launched Growth Mindset. And he launched it and he explained that, it started with the book Mindset written by Carol Dweck. And the book was about school children and how we teach our children the wrong way because we teach them with a fixed mindset about the knowledge they need for today, and then they kind of spend 10 years learning and then do their exams, then they leave school and they realize that the world has changed and all that knowledge is pretty useless. And so what we should have been teaching them is this growth mindset, to be curious, to be interested, to find what the problem is, not what the solution is, to be able to explore and then to find the answers as they require them over time. And in today's world, you can find knowledge on tap, on demand, whenever you need it.
Yep.
So having that growth mindset together with that experimentation kind of process, together with that more fluid structure, together with that future back strategic thinking, starts to create a different type of organization, which really is proof for the future. It's future proof.
And you mentioned something very interesting, and I want to go back to it. The future is here, but it's not evenly distributed.
Yep.
Do you see that inside organizations as well? Like sometimes the organization have a center of excellence that performs really well. They are looking forward, but at the same time, another department, I don't know, in London or up north, they are looking at things in a completely different way. The systems are not. No. Do you see that across organizations? And how do you kind of help this center of excellence, the good practices, the good thinking, cascade down the organization?
Yeah, I definitely do, and I see it particularly across global businesses where different business units work in very different ways. Quite often, it's the business units which are in the far off regions. So I was working with an Italian drinks company recently, and actually I found that the Asia Pacific team, furthest away from Italy, were the ones who were being most innovative. They were thinking differently about their market. They were recognizing that the Italian mindset in terms of how the consumer kind of buys things and uses things is completely different from the Asian mindset. Yeah. And so they were forced to think differently, both in terms of their product development and their marketing, and also then in terms of how they worked operationally with their partners. And so I think that often you find much more excellence, if you want to call it that, but relevance to their market in local places which are away from the center. I also think you see it a lot in venture businesses. So when organizations have set up a number of ventures, either an incubator with their internal ventures or they're working with joint ventures, then you see very different behaviors in those joint ventures or in those internal ventures where they're ring-fenced and they've got much more focus on something. So I think that's it. I don't think there's necessarily a best practice. But there's different practices which are relevant to different situations. And the different practices might be relevant to different marketplaces, and so serving different types of consumers. Or it might be about different types of projects. So some of them are working on long-term innovative projects. Some of them are working in short-term operational delivery. And so what is best practice is what is right for the particular challenge which they have. I tell you, one of the most interesting organizations I've seen is Haier, the Chinese white goods company. And today they're the world leader in home appliances. They started in 1984 in Guangdong with Zhang Rumin, started the Guangdong refrigerator factory, and they've grown into this huge international global leader today. But they have a model of Ren Den Hei, and Ren Den Hei in English means living company. And they have around 10,000 different companies within their company. So they're set up like micro businesses. And the head office is not the peak of the pyramid. Instead, the head office is more like the support center, but more like a venture capital company. So they invest in each of these micro businesses, which are typically kind of, less than 100 people. Each of the micro businesses works like an entrepreneurial startup. Each of these micro businesses is close to the customer, focused on what they do. But they also have the benefits of the corporate brand, of being, this huge million-person company, global leader. So they have the distribution power and they have the brand power of the big parent company. And what you see is much faster working, much more entrepreneurial, creative thinking within those teams, much closer teams because they all know each other. But then you see collaboration between the teams, and that becomes really powerful as well. And just as an example, then I was asking Zhang Rumin when I was writing my last book, I was saying, well, give me an example as to, well, what does this look like in terms of how your organization will constantly reinvent itself? And he said, well, within 5 years, Peter, I can imagine that, we make more refrigerators than anybody. Within 5 years, we'll probably give those refrigerators away free.
Why?
Well, he said, the refrigerator is basically a piece of metal which sits in the corner of your kitchen. It doesn't do much. Its utility, its value to the consumer is not really that great. And we make, say, $1,000 every 10 years from a refrigerator. But think about the food which goes into the refrigerator. And obviously, if you can track all the food which goes in and out of it, then you can do much, much more. So firstly, you could work in partnership as an ecosystem, and you could bring together food suppliers who can supply the food or replenish the food automatically. But then you can also start to add value to the actual human being. So maybe in terms of nutritional advice or cookery courses or whatever it might be. And so you become much more important to the customer. You become much more intimate. And if you think about it, how much do you spend on the fridge? Well, $1,000 every 10 years. How much do you spend on food? Probably, I don't know, $1,000 every month or something. Yeah. So, which business do you want to be in? And so rethinking as we kind of both have those different organization models for how do we think entrepreneurially, but also how do we have those strategies to connect with how's the world changing, rethinking how your industry works.
And it's very interesting because I've been listening to you and you mentioned some very interesting Chinese examples.
Yeah.
What is going on in China? And is there a particular element in the ecosystem there? Is it just the sheer size of the population that enables this ecosystem of innovative companies to grow and to be looking at the future, just like you said? Is there anything in particular that comes to mind when you think about the market over there?
I think the real exciting thing about looking at Asian companies, and I would include Indian and some other companies as well, not just Chinese, is that they live in a part of the world which has 5 to 6 billion people. And that's 2/3 of the world for starters. So it is most of the world. They live in a part of the world where they've got the fastest growing middle class. So people are emerging and are making choices for the first time. They're also therefore living in a world where they have a blank canvas in many ways. And so they don't have legacy. And so they can create anything they want to. So they don't kind of try to make the past better. They jump to the future. So there's a thing about jumping to the future and being able to kind of just create something forwards looking as opposed to having to cope with what you've done in the past, which is like the Western automotive makers have the big problem with in terms of how do you stop making the internal combustion engine cars and move to electric vehicles, for example. There's also a point about ecosystems. And, if you look at most Chinese companies, they are ecosystems. And we're most familiar with WeChat, the broad kind of messaging platform, but also companies like Alibaba and so on, which is actually a platform of many, many different companies. And so they work as ecosystems, and that gives them much more flexibility, it gives them much more speed, and it means that they don't have to focus on a few capabilities in-house. They bring the capabilities together as they require it. And that gives them both a breadth of ability to do things, but also a speed in terms of which they can do things much, much faster. There's also, particularly in China's case, there's state support, which goes with it, which helps them. But in terms of being a global player, they get to the future much, much quicker. If you look at a company like BYD, for example, then it's an obvious example in terms of not just creating cars, which are equal or better to Tesla today, but they've focused really in terms of the battery technology, the charging networks, and then they've looked beyond the car because actually mobility is not just cars, and we're redefining what the sector is. Yeah. And so they're thinking about how do you win in an age of mobility. If you look at kind of careering companies, they're doing the same. Samsung to some extent, Hyundai would be another example. Hyundai recently redefined itself not as an automotive company, but as a hydrogen company. So it said our big bet is that hydrogen will be the fuel of the future. In order to be a company where hydrogen fuels the cars, we need to be able to produce more hydrogen than anybody else and to distribute it. So we're going to make ourselves a hydrogen company first and an automotive company second. So they're reinventing themselves as an energy company. Actually, Tesla is an energy company as well, if you look at their strategy.
Yes, software company as well.
Yeah. So rethinking, how you look at your business. And I think, there's this whole culture of looking forwards. There's this whole culture of collaboration. There's also this whole culture of what sector are you in? Because we have these old labels, which are pretty meaningless today. And, even in Europe, we're gradually realizing, like Ferrari. Ferrari last year announced that 50% of their revenues in the future will come from non-automotive. And fashion and food will be their two biggest sectors, which will be the growth. So what sector are you in? And you can be in anything you want to be. So you have to frame the space you want to be in. You have to frame that future space which you want to in, and then think about how can you win in that new space.
And if I'm a CEO now, and I'm listening to what you said, and I wake up, today's Friday, I go back home, think, okay, Monday is the day I jump into the future. Yeah. Right? Yeah. How do I start? What is the first step I need to take?
That's not easy because how do you create the future?
Come on, you know.
But I think what it's a mindset.
Right. Okay.
It's a mindset, and you can jump into the future mindset right now. And what do I do on Monday? I start to look at the mega trends rather than the quarterly trends. What do I look at Monday? I started to look at how my company is creating value over the long term, the future cash flows, not the quarterly results. And they are perhaps two of the most important things. And, we've become obsessed with quarterly results when actually investors want us to create long-term value. We've become obsessed with what does the consumer want now, whereas Steve Jobs taught us 10 years ago or even longer that it's not what the customer says they want, it's actually how the world is changing and how we can create the products and services for the future. So it's about being much more future back in your thinking is what I'm saying. So being able to think, and in this exponential world where things change faster than ever, how can I start to change and change from the future back? And also, how can I change when it doesn't feel like I have to?
Interesting.
Because, if you look at the models of how markets change, we have these things called S-curves. Have you come across S-curves? You perhaps did when you were studying your MBA many years ago, but people always forget them. But they're perhaps one of the most interesting little things which define markets. And markets move like S's. They grow slowly, then faster, and then they slow down again. And then the market is reinvented. So you have another S, and then you have another S. So if you think about Netflix, for example, it went through. You're drawing it now. Yeah. So the first S was about kind of DVD delivered to your home. The second S was about streaming and subscription. The third S was about being content creation company. And then the next S is about gaming, actually. So the company keeps reinventing itself. Or if you look at a company like Fujifilm, Japanese company, they went from camera film to medical imaging to cosmetics to pharmaceuticals. So that's how they've moved the S-curves. And as these S-curves, people always think, well, I'm doing okay as I'm going at the S, as my market's growing and as things are looking good. It's when the S slows down, when the market slows down and my results start to get more difficult. That's when I need to change. Too late.
No, okay.
The time to change is when you're at your peak. The time to change is when you're doing your best. The time to change is when you have a position of power and you're profitable, your customers love you, things are going well inside the organization, you've attracted great talent. That's the time to think about how do I reinvent myself for the future? And then to do it again, and then to do it again.
And how do you know you are at the peak? Because you obviously, if you have that optimistic mindset, you are there, and you're on the first big curve of, the positive curve of a big trend, and you're selling well, achieving all your targets. You still believe next year you're going to even go even further, right? But then at some point you stop doing that. But I guess it's very difficult for companies to realize when they are at the top, right?
Yeah. So there is no kind of specific signal. What you will start to see is companies in the margins doing things differently. You'll start to see some disruptive startups who are challenging the traditional ways in which businesses in your industry work. And you might think they're not important. But consumers, and certainly the early adopters, might think they're interesting. And if you allow them to grow, they will grow to the point where they start to be the cool companies and the ones who would become the profitable companies, whilst you're starting to decline. So I guess, the signal of when it's time to to reinvent yourself is when you start to see these companies in the margins doing things differently, and these consumers behaving differently as a result of it. And that's the when the alarm bell should say, now is the time to reinvent myself. Jack Welch, he always went around his company, if you remember back to when he was CEO of GE, and he always said, DYB, destroy your business. And he said to his employees, destroy your business, because that's how somebody else will think. And so we have to have that same mindset internally, because they're always looking to destroy. Now, I don't think, destruction is necessarily the best way to think about it, but reinventing yourself and reinventing your marketplace for the future is really the positive way to think about, particularly when things are going well. How can we create the next generation of our company now?
Fascinating. I really need to start looking at that. I want to try something different today. We want to try a different, just to close the episode, a rapid fire round.
Oh, excellent. Fantastic.
Yeah? So please tell me the name of a book that every CEO, every future focused leader should read.
Humanocracy. How your organizations can be as amazing as the people inside them.
Who's the author?
Gary Hamel.
One underrated skill of the future.
Adjacent thinking. So being able to look at adjacent marketplaces, not your own marketplace, but adjacent marketplaces.
Very interesting, and good that you took some time to think about it. One question every CEO should be asking their CHRO.
How can we unlock the value of the talent of our organization? So how can that become not something which is just essential to have to do what we do, but how can it become our competitive advantage?
What trend of the ones that you listed or the ones that you're looking into are you most excited about?
Sustainable innovation. So how can you use this amazing array of technologies you have to solve the world's big problems, be it climate change, be it social injustice, or whatever it might be? Sustainable innovation, not sustainability itself, but how do you use the catalyst of social and environmental issues to truly innovate?
Final question of the day. One trend you think is overhyped?
AI.
Oh, wow. Why?
Because it's not AI itself, it's what you do with it.
Right. On that note, I think we're done. Peter, anything else that you think that is worth thinking about that leaders, HR, executive leaders should be thinking about today that we didn't cover here?
I think particularly for learning and development professionals who probably are listening to this podcast most, one of the big things which I think is an opportunity is to connect better learning and development with the strategy and the objectives of the organization. So many times I work with fantastic L&D people I'm part of and delivering great programs, but the CEO or the C-suite don't know about them, or they don't necessarily see the connection between what's going on. And I think the huge opportunity is actually that learning development programs become the transformational platforms for organizations. So that they're not something which are separate, they're not something which is nice to do, they're not something which are done 3 years ahead of when they're needed. They're done because they're the best way in which we can transform our business now. So it's not something which is nice to take time out of the business for the participants. It's essential.
Yeah.
It's not something which is a nice cost to the business. It's an essential investment to the business.
Yeah.
And it aligns with what the strategy is, and when they work on projects and that kind of stuff, the projects are things which are actually going to drive the business forwards in a fundamentally practical and profitable, deliverable way. So, I always say next is now. The future is already here. What you do today is about creating the future. So more important than ever, what you do in those learning and development interventions should be about creating the future for real and right now.
Excellent. Peter, thank you very much. We really enjoyed the conversation, learned a lot. If people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way?
I'm on LinkedIn, and you can email me. My website is peterfisk.com.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Peter. I've been Thiago Kiwi, and this is Learning Rewired by Headspring.